Even if you weren't alive back then, the OJ Simpson trial, it's one of those things that just sticks with you decades later, and it still fascinates, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's hard to escape its legacy, that's for sure.
And today, we're going to take a deep dive into this case. Go beyond, just the headlines. Really try to understand what it says about America then and now even.
It's a fascinating case, really, when you think about it. Race, celebrity, that whole media frenzy, and the justice system, like right under the microscope. The OJ trial, it had it all. I mean, it was a melting pot of America's kind of deepest anxieties.
Yeah, and to understand how huge this thing was, we got to start with OJ himself. Before the trial, he was a legend, a football legend, but more than that, a cultural icon, right? A symbol of the American dream. And then he's the prime suspect in these murders. His ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman.
We'll be using excerpts from this really in-depth text on the trial for this deep dive. And it's amazing. I think you'll see how OJ's story, the trial, and even what happened after, it gives us this unique perspective on, America's relationship with race and justice, how we've struggled and still do.
Yeah. Okay, so OJ's journey, humble beginnings, right, in San Francisco, and he becomes this football star. But this was the 60s, 70s. Pro sports, society, I mean, it wasn't exactly welcoming to black athletes then.
Absolutely. And his own relationship with being black, with his racial identity, it's a crucial part of all of this. Imagine, right, a young black man. He's navigating this world, this mostly white world, the 60s, the 70s, and there's this quote, it's attributed to him, "I am not black, I am OJ." I mean, that says something, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It speaks volumes, really. Whether he said it or not, the quote, it's about the pressure he must have felt to be accepted by white America, to kind of transcend race almost.
Yeah, he was walking this tightrope, right? And we see that in his early success with commercials. Those Hertz ads, everyone remembers those. He's sprinting through airports. He was marketable to everyone, black and white audiences, because he wasn't seen as threatening.
He became this symbol of aspiration. But it makes you wonder how much of himself did he have to compromise to achieve that, to be that successful?
It is a paradox, right? He achieves the American dream, but then what? At what cost? I mean, he was celebrated, sure, but he was also forced to conform, to quiet a part of himself. The text even mentions ABC. They actually pushed him to change how he spoke. They wanted him to tone down. They called them black intonations.
Wow, that's really something, a powerful example of, I don't know, what minorities face, right? The pressure to fit in, to succeed in a world that wasn't really made for them. So he builds this persona, this OJ identity. It transcends race, and it worked. Largely, it worked. But then, as we know, his life with Nicole Brown Simpson, it starts to fall apart.
Exactly. And the text, it goes into detail about this. What looked like a perfect marriage, picture perfect from the outside. It wasn't. It was marred by domestic abuse. And it escalated. Nicole, she called the police multiple times. But OJ,
he was shielded, right?
Yeah.
By his fame, his wealth. Minimal consequences.
It's chilling, really, how power dynamics work, especially in these abusive relationships and celebrity status. It's almost like a shield to avoid being held accountable.
It's a pattern. We see it over and over again, even today. But in this case, the story, it takes this dark turn. The brutal murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Right. And we won't get into the graphic details, but just the brutality of it, it shocked the nation. This wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a turning point in how America viewed, everything. Race, justice, the media. The media's role in shaping how we see things.
The trial, it became this powder keg. America was already dealing with so much racial tension. I mean, the Rodney King beating, the officers being acquitted after that was still so fresh.
And then, right into this mix comes the OJ Simpson trial. And it becomes this media circus, 24/7 coverage, opinions everywhere. And OJ's defense team, led by Johnny Cochran, brilliant lawyer, they knew exactly how to play this.
Masters of the courtroom, those guys. They didn't just try to confront the evidence head on. They shifted the focus. They put the LAPD on trial, basically. Their history of racism, the corruption, they knew that in LA, with the racial climate there, making people doubt the LAPD, that was powerful.
And then there are the Mark Fuhrman tapes. Fuhrman was a detective, a key detective on the case. And these tapes, they reveal him using racial slurs, bragging about planting evidence.
It was a bombshell. Those tapes, they blew the prosecution's case wide open. Reasonable doubt. It wasn't just a legal term anymore. It was real for a lot of people.
It was. And that sets the stage for, well, for one of the most iconic moments in American legal history.
The glove.
Ah, the glove. That one piece of evidence, or really the fact that it didn't seem to fit on OJ's hand. It became a turning point. Remember Cochran's line, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
It's a phrase. It's stuck with us, hasn't it? Simple, powerful, and it worked. But how did something so straightforward, this glove, how did it become so important? That's what we'll get into next.
The glove, it was, it was courtroom theater at its finest. Played right into the defense's whole narrative, right?
Yeah.
That OJ was being targeted because he was black, that the evidence, you couldn't trust it.
It's wild how a simple thing, this glove not fitting, could sway people so much. It planted that seed of doubt. And for a lot of people, especially in the black community, it resonated deeply. I mean, this was just a few years after Rodney King. Those wounds were still very raw.
Yeah. And then the verdict, not guilty. The reaction, I can't imagine what that must have been like.
The country, it was split. White America, I think, was stunned, bewildered even. And in the black community, a lot of people, they erupted. Cheers, celebrations. It's like two different realities, clashing.
Two Americas reacting to the same thing in such different ways. It's powerful. What does that say about, I don't know, race relations back then?
It speaks volumes about the division, the feeling of injustice that so many black Americans felt. I mean, there's a quote in the text, Danny Bakewell, he was a prominent activist. He said, "It's good that white people feel for once the injustices that we've lived with for centuries."
Wow. That's a heavy statement. So for some people, OJ being acquitted, regardless of whether he actually did it, it was a win against a system that had been against them for so long.
Yeah. It was. The text actually calls it poetic justice. Like the scales finally tipped, even if it meant maybe a murderer walked free.
It's a difficult thing to grapple with, but it does get to the heart of the resentment, the distrust that so many people felt and still feel towards the justice system, especially, in marginalized communities.
It raises the question, what is justice, right? When the system itself, the one that's supposed to deliver it, it's seen as biased, broken even.
It's a question we're still asking today.
Oh.
As we deal with racial inequality, with bias in the system.
And that's one of the biggest takeaways from this whole deep dive into the OJ trial. It wasn't just about one event. It was about America, our struggles, the things we still haven't figured out.
The trial, it made America look at itself at some ugly truths about race, about class, about privilege. It exposed these deep, deep divisions. And while we haven't bridged those, not completely, not yet.
And even though the trial, it ended, the conversations it started about race, about justice, about how the media, how it shapes us, those are more important now than ever. We're still on this journey, trying to create a society that's truly just, truly equal.
A journey we're all on together.
Yeah.
And understanding the OJ Simpson trial, all of it, the context, what it meant, what it still means, that's a step in the right direction.
It is. It makes us think critically, question our own assumptions, and keep pushing, keep fighting for a better world for everyone.
Okay, so the prosecution, they leaned heavily on DNA evidence, which back then was pretty new, wasn't it?
It was, and that's where things get interesting. The defense, they managed to challenge that DNA evidence. They brought up chain of custody issues, contamination. They made the jury doubt it.
Right. And the text, it points this out. It highlights how important it is to have a good defense team.
Yeah.
OJ's lawyers, they were really good. They understood how to tell a story, how to connect with the jury.
They shifted the whole narrative, away from OJ's guilt and onto the LAPD. They painted him as the victim of a system that was racist.
And with all the distrust towards the LAPD, especially in the black community, it worked.
It did. The trial, it stopped being about the facts, the evidence. It became about who you believed.
So they won the PR battle, even if we still don't know for sure whether OJ was guilty.
Exactly. And that brings us back to OJ. What happened to him after the trial?
Well, he was acquitted, right? But that wasn't the end of it.
No, it wasn't. He was found liable for the deaths, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, in a civil trial.
So no criminal punishment, but he was held accountable in a different way.
Right. And this shows the difference between criminal and civil trials. Criminal, it's a higher bar. Beyond a reasonable doubt, that's the standard. But civil, it's lower. They just have to prove it's more likely than not that he was responsible.
So the families of the victims, they got some measure of justice, even though OJ wasn't found guilty in the criminal trial.
They did. And it's interesting, right? Even after being acquitted, OJ's life, it unraveled. Financial problems,
Yep.
public scorn, and in the end, he ended up in prison anyway for a different crime.
Like a Greek tragedy almost. He had it all. Fame, fortune, talent.
Mm.
And it was all brought down by his own actions.
It is a cautionary tale
Yeah.
about fame, about hubris, and about, about facing the consequences of what you do. But before we get into all that, there's another piece of OJ's story that's worth exploring. His advertising career. He was a pioneer, really.
Oh yeah, the Hertz commercials. OJ, the pitchman. He was able to connect with everyone, black and white audiences,
Yeah.
in a time when things were so divided.
It's amazing, his charisma, his talent, and like we talked about before, that persona he built. He was this figure that transcended race, someone everyone could get behind.
But being that person, that OJ, not just a black athlete, it came with a price, didn't it?
It did. And it makes you think, how much of yourself do you give up to succeed in a world that wasn't made for you? It's a question a lot of people, a lot of minorities still struggle with today.
It's what makes OJ's story so fascinating, so relevant. It forces us to look at tough issues, race, ambition, the American dream, and what it really means.
And as we finish up this deep dive, we're going to look at the legacy of the OJ trial, what it tells us about justice, about where we are now in America.
It's crazy, isn't it? Decades. It's been decades since the OJ trial. We're still talking about it.
It's one of those things it sticks with you.
Yeah. And as we've seen, it's not just, a story about a trial. It says something about us, about America.
It goes way beyond the courtroom. Race, class, justice, and the media, how it shapes what we think. It's all in there.
We've covered a lot, haven't we? OJ's like rise to fame, then those murders, the trial itself, the verdict, and everything that came after. It's obvious now, this case, it exposed some serious cracks in America.
It did. And one of the things that's really unsettling is how people reacted to the verdict. It was like two completely different worlds. White America, mostly, they couldn't believe it. And a lot of black people, they felt, I don't know, relief, even joy.
Yeah. To America, seeing the same thing, but experiencing it so differently. Why do you think that was?
Well, you can't look at the verdict in isolation. For a lot of black Americans, this trial, it was about more than just OJ. It was about a system that had failed them over and over again.
So even if they had doubts about OJ, about whether he was innocent, the verdict itself, it felt like a win. A win against the system.
Exactly. The text, it even uses the term poetic justice.
Yeah.
The scales finally tipped, in favor of a black man, even if it meant maybe a guilty man went free.
It's a tough concept, right?
Right.
But it does show you how deep the resentment ran, the distrust of the justice system. And that's still there today, especially in marginalized communities.
It makes you ask, what is justice? When the system, the one that's supposed to uphold it, it's seen as unfair, as biased.
The question we're still asking, aren't we?
Yeah.
As we try to deal with racial inequality, with all the bias that's still in the system.
And that's the key takeaway, I think, from looking at the OJ Simpson trial. It wasn't just one event. It was a mirror reflecting all of America's problems.
It forced America to look at itself, at some hard truths about race, about class, about privilege. And those divisions, they're still there. We haven't figured it all out yet.
No, we haven't. But the trial, it started a conversation about race, about justice, about the power of the media, and that conversation, it needs to continue.
Yeah, it does. It's a journey, really, trying to create a society that's truly just, truly fair.
Yeah.
And understanding the OJ Simpson trial, all the complexities, that's part of that journey.
It is. It forces us to think, to question what we believe, and to keep fighting for a better world for everyone.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. OJ Simpson, a man who was both, this symbol of the American dream and a warning about how easily it can fall apart.
We looked at his life, his trial, the impact it had on everything. The legal strategies, the questions it raised about race, about justice, about the media's role, and all of it.
But the biggest question, the one we keep coming back to, is what does it all mean? What does the O.J. Simpson trial tell us about ourselves, about America, about justice, and whether we can ever truly achieve it? I hope that's something you keep thinking about long after this deep dive is over.